My husband's son and I shared a shocking secret that we kept hidden, a tale of true forbidden love. Ellie reclined in her chair. The city lights of Manhattan illuminating her office window with a gentle radiance. It had been yet another exhausting day at the marketing firm, packed with client meetings and countless revisions. But her thoughts wandered to Oliver Point. 2 months had passed since their encounter. 2 months of lingering glances across conference tables, of shared late-night cab rides, of quiet dinners that stretched into something deeper than mere professional rapport. Oliver possessed a captivating charm, sharp intellect, and a thoughtful nature that made her feel truly acknowledged in a world that frequently diminished her to mere appearances. He brought laughter to her, and beyond that, he stirred a desire within her to lower her defenses, a rare occurrence for her after such a long time. As she collected her belongings and entered the elevator this evening, she glanced at her phone. A message from Oliver flickered on the screen. Oliver has just parked outside and needs a ride home. A smile danced at the corner of her lips. He consistently made this gesture, providing her with a ride and creating reasons to linger in each other's company. She understood the direction this was taking, the destination he intended it to reach. She had guided it with a measured and intentional pace. As she emerged from the building, her eyes immediately caught sight of his car. A sleek black Audi, understated yet elegant, much like its driver. She slipped into the passenger seat, the aroma of leather and his cologne wrapping around her. It was a long day, he inquired, his voice smooth and familiar. You have no idea, she sighed, kicking off her heels and stretching her legs. Let me know you have dinner plans that include something beyond takeout at my place. He let out a soft laugh as he merged into the evening traffic. I was considering taking you to a unique place. A quaint spot beside the flowing river, subdued, personal. Ellie turned to him, raising an eyebrow in curiosity. That seems rather reminiscent of a date. Oliver smirked, his gaze fixed firmly on the road ahead. It can be anything you desire. And that was the essence of Oliver. He never pressured her, never sought anything beyond what she was ready to offer. He exhibited a remarkable level of patience, bordering on excessive, as though he were anticipating her next action. As they drove, the conversation flowed effortlessly, touching on work, life, and a little teasing back and forth. It felt effortless with Oliver, perhaps a bit too effortless. She ought to have been cautious, to have pondered why she was permitting herself to be entangled in something that could easily become intricate. However, she chose not to. Not at this moment. The restaurant matched his description perfectly, dimly lit and situated right at the water's edge, with candles flickering softly on every table. They nestled into their seats, effortlessly ordering wine without the need to inquire about each other's tastes. You know, Oliver said after their first sip, I was thinking about introducing you to someone. Ellie peered at him through her glass, curiosity piqued. Oh, is there someone significant? He paused, lingering for just a moment too long. My child, Simon. The name resonated with a sense of familiarity. He had brought up Simon previously, a 24-year-old who was athletic and exuded confidence. Ellie had envisioned someone akin to Oliver. Sophisticated and composed, yet, there was an element in the manner Oliver expressed it, in the deliberate way he observed her response, that caused her to hesitate. She observed that you haven't discussed him very often, Oliver breathed out, swirling his wine. He paused once more, then chuckled gently. I'm uncertain. Meeting him feels like it could transform everything, Ellie scowled. What would be the reason for that? He shook his head, yet his smile remained constrained. Let it go. I find myself caught in a web of thoughts. However, Ellie did not forget it. The thought lingered throughout the evening, woven into Oliver's subtle touches. His hand resting on the small of her back as they departed, the gentle brush of his fingers against hers when he offered her a coat. As he pulled up to her apartment, he leaned in to plant a soft, lingering kiss on her cheek before she opened the car door. In that moment, she couldn't help but ponder what fears were holding Oliver back. The next time she encountered Simon, it was completely unexpected. On the subsequent Saturday morning, she found herself in a coffee shop, her laptop aglow before her, a familiar cappuccino in hand. As she immersed herself in a sea of emails, she hardly registered the figure next to her until a rich voice pierced her concentration. Ellie Wright, she gazed upward, her eyes fluttering. He stood tall. Even taller than Oliver, with broad shoulders and sun-kissed skin. There was a natural confidence about him, one that felt effortless and inherent. His dark hair was nearly shaved on the sides, with the top bleached blonde. His eyes, keen and penetrating, observed her with a hint of amusement. "Indeed," she remarked, placing her coffee on the table. He smirked, sliding into the chair across from her as if he owned the place, not bothering to wait for an invitation. "I was aware of it, father was correct. You're precisely what he looks for." Ellie tilted her head. Curiosity piqued. "So, you must be Simon." "In the flesh," he remarked, leaning his arms on the table, his biceps subtly flexing beneath his fitted black t-shirt. "He didn't mention that we would cross paths, did he?" "No," she confessed, observing him intently. "Was this intended?" Simon chuckled, a smile spreading across his face as he shook his head in disbelief. "Nope. It seems to be destiny, perhaps, destiny." Ellie ought to have understood then, ought to have recognized that this moment, this seemingly trivial encounter, was on the verge of initiating something beyond her control. Because Simon was entirely different from what she had anticipated, the intensity of his gaze, filled with an unsettling understanding, sent a shiver racing down her spine. "Do not fear. Something completely different." I had just lifted my cappuccino to my lips when a rich, playful voice interrupted my musings. "So, is your dad aware that you're out here looking like this?" Startled, I looked up and locked eyes with Simon. He was grinning, his eyes glinting with amusement, confidence radiating from every movement as he settled into the chair across from me without waiting for an invitation. "What does it look like?" I inquired, tilting my head, feigning indifference. With a hint of mischief, he remarked, smirking as he savored his espresso, taking his time with each sip. I let out a soft chuckle, shaking my head slightly. "Is this your way of flirting? You simply approach women in coffee shops and say they seem like trouble." "Only when it's true," he retorted without a moment's pause. He possessed an effortless quality, a comfort in his own skin that drew me in with undeniable intrigue. I was aware that I needed to exercise caution. He was the son of Oliver, for heaven's sake, yet Simon possessed a remarkable ability to make me forget that, even within just a few minutes of conversation. For the next 20 minutes, he brought me more laughter than I had experienced in months. His jokes were sharp, occasionally teetering on the edge of confidence, yet always delivered without a hint of arrogance. He exuded a playful charm. His magnetic gaze fixed on me as if I were an intriguing subject worthy of exploration, causing a tightness in my stomach that I was reluctant to confront. After finishing his coffee, he pushed back his chair and stood up, stretching his arms high above his head. "Perhaps our paths will cross again, beautiful," he remarked with a smile before departing. I sat there, momentarily paralyzed, my heart pounding with an intensity that felt almost irrational, absolutely stunning. It was a simple word, yet hearing it from him, from someone so young and so full of life, sent a curious thrill through me. That night, I hardly found any rest. His voice, his smirk, the way he leaned in just a little too close, it was all echoing in my thoughts, again and again. It was absurd. I was an adult woman. I was in a relationship with his father, and yet, I rolled onto my side, burying my face in the pillow, unable to dispel him from my mind. On Monday evening, as I exited my office, weary and eager to return home, a familiar voice halted me in my tracks. "Ellie," I turned, and there it was, a sleek graphite-colored Tesla gliding up to the curb. The window rolled down, and Simon sat behind the wheel, gazing at me with that effortless confidence, as if he possessed all the time in the world. "Hurry," he urged. "I will guide you there." I scowled. "Where shall I go?" He smiled broadly. Is it significant? Embrace life a bit more. I paused for a brief moment, chuckling at my own thoughts, before settling into the passenger seat. The car surged ahead, the city fading into a blur as he navigated through the traffic with a fluidity that it ought to have instilled fear in me, yet it evoked an entirely different emotion. The soft whir of the Tesla was almost drowned out by the rapid beat of my heart. Simon lowered the window, allowing the cool night air to rush in, and suddenly threw his head back, shouting, "You-hoo-hoo!" I inhaled sharply, then erupted into laughter. "Are you out of your mind, perhaps?" he shouted above the howling wind. "When was the most recent occasion you experienced enjoyment like this?" I glanced down, my fingers idly toying with the hem of my sleeve, before softly murmuring, "Likely never." Simon cast a fleeting look my way, and in that brief moment, a shift occurred in his demeanor. The teasing diminished, gently giving way to a more tender atmosphere, indeed, that needs to be addressed. I found myself uncertain about the sequence of events, yet here we were. Unexpectedly at my apartment. One moment we were driving, and the next, Simon flung his jacket onto my couch as if he had been here countless times before. "Do you frequently allow unfamiliar men into your residence?" he playfully taunted, observing me from the other side of the room. "Only those who drive Teslas." I retaliated. He chuckled. And a sensation in my chest constricted. I required a moment to pause, to gather my thoughts. "I'll be right back," I said, slipping away into my bedroom. "Those are quite the shapes," he continued, his gaze sweeping over me with not a trace of remorse. "Superior to my latest Tesla." I'm absolutely elated. "Get out," I commanded, seizing the closest object. I grabbed a pillow from my bed and tossed it at him. He evaded with ease, chuckling softly. "Take it easy, I'm simply appreciating the view. It's important to embrace compliments more, Ellie." I averted my gaze, feeling flustered, as I pulled a sweater over my head. When I glanced back, he had already made his way to the kitchen, sifting through the contents of my fridge. "Come on," he called, raising a beer in the air. "Let us indulge in a drink. So, you don't enjoy beer, huh?" I folded my arms, feigning irritation but not quite succeeding. "I do. All right, let's get moving," he said, snatching another bottle and making his way to the door. The park lay almost deserted, the sky brushed with gentle hues of pink and orange as the sun sank lower. We reclined on the grass, our shoulders nearly brushing against each other. I savored a sip of my beer, feeling the coolness embrace my chest, as I observed the sky transition into twilight. "You know," Simon said suddenly, his voice now softer, "I understand why my dad is fond of you." I turned to him, sensing a change within me. "Oh, you're different," he remarked plainly, distinct from the rest. I gazed at the bottle in my hands, uncertain of how to reply. Then he reached out, his fingers gently grazing my hair, tucking a loose strand behind my ear. The touch sent a shiver through me, causing me to stiffen. "Simon, you always wear that expression," he said softly, tilting his head just a bit. "As if you're on the verge of taking off." I gulped. "Perhaps I ought to, however you will not," he remarked. Indeed, he was correct. His hand hovered close to my face, his thumb brushing against my cheek softly. The air was heavy, electric, as if time itself was elongating beyond its natural bounds. And then, in a moment of impulse, without allowing myself a second to reconsider, I bridged the distance that separated us. The kiss unfolded slowly, initially marked by hesitation, yet soon something deep within me shattered, releasing a flood of emotion. Simon's hand wove through my hair, drawing me nearer, intensifying the kiss, and I surrendered completely to the moment, losing myself in him. It was impulsive. It was an error, and yet, as the final rays of sunlight vanished beyond the horizon, I found myself unable to muster any concern. I had persuaded myself that I could let it go, that I could shove it aside, bury it deep within, and ensure it never emerged again. I excelled at the art of pretense. I had devoted weeks to meeting Oliver, pretending that nothing had shifted, chuckling at his tales, allowing him to sweep my hair back with that familiar tenderness he possessed. I convinced myself that the way my heart raced at the mere mention of Simon's name was insignificant. I had never encountered him before. I had never encountered him before. At least, that was the story I told myself. Then, Oliver entered my office alongside him. I was engrossed in reviewing a campaign proposal when a knock interrupted my thoughts. I hardly had a moment to share the news of Oliver's arrival before he swung the door open. his presence enveloping the room with that comforting, recognizable energy. Yet, there he stood, Simon, with that infuriating smirk, as if this were merely a playful contest. "Ellie," Oliver said. "So I thought it would be a good idea to stop by." I rose gradually, compelling my face into a mask of neutrality. My palms were slick with sweat, and my heartbeat echoed like a drum. Simon tilted his head slightly, as if anticipating my reaction, then, as if nothing had ever transpired between us, he stepped forward and extended a hand. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Miss Ellie," he remarked, his voice flowing with a playful charm. "You have to be my future mother. I have always envisioned having a mother like that." The room slanted just a bit. Oliver chuckled, shaking his head in amusement. "Disregard him. He believes he's amusing," yet I hardly caught what he said. My cheeks burned, my fingers curling at my sides as I struggled to steady myself. Simon locked eyes with me, poised, challenging. I took his hand, shaking it briefly and formally. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Simon." His grip lingered for a moment longer than necessary before he finally released it. His smirk grew more pronounced. I settled back into my seat, directing my attention to the glow of my laptop screen. Despite the words swirling in my mind, fuzzy intertwined, Oliver was discussing dinner plans, expressing his happiness about our meeting, but my attention was consumed by Simon's presence in the room. I felt his gaze flicker toward me between Oliver's sentences, and the lingering sensation of his touch on my palm was still palpable. I can hardly recall how the discussion wrapped up. As they departed, I found myself clutching the edge of my desk, my breath coming in quick, heavy gasps. That evening, Oliver and I found ourselves in a serene cafe, the city lights dancing softly beyond the window. He extended his hand across the table, his fingers lightly grazing mine, unaware of the turmoil brewing within me. "I think Simon likes you," he said casually, sipping his coffee. I compelled a smile. "He appears quite captivating." Oliver let out a soft laugh. "That's one way to put it." I nodded, my gaze fixed on the untouched tea before me. Suddenly, my phone buzzed to life. I didn't even need to look at the name to be certain. My stomach churned. With deliberate caution, I cast my eyes upon the screen. "Look at how fortunate I am to have such a beautiful mother. Could we possibly meet tomorrow evening, Mom?" "Aha." He had pierced my spine. I maintained a calm expression, compelling myself to inhale slowly and deliberately. Oliver was observing me, his demeanor relaxed. "Indifferent. Is everything all right?" he inquired. I swallowed, locking my phone. "Absolutely. Just focus on the task at hand." Then I took a sip of my tea, feigning indifference to the words Simon had just sent. Were not burning themselves into my thoughts that night, despite my efforts. Simon lingered in my thoughts. I gazed at the ceiling in my softly illuminated bedroom, my thoughts spiraling back to the way he had regarded me in my office, teasing, aware. The way his fingers had lingered just a moment too long when we shook hands, the manner in which his words had sparked a surge of something illicit within me. I rolled onto my side, tightly shutting my eyes. "That's sufficient." I convinced myself that I was finished engaging in whatever this may have been. I promised myself I wouldn't reply. Yet by dawn, my determination had shattered. I perched on the edge of my bed, phone clutched in hand, my heart pounding as I began to type. "Where are you, me?" A brief pause lingered before the response arrived. "Catch you at home," and here I believed you had forgotten about me, Mom. I chose to overlook the provocation. "Hey, would you like to take a drive?" I could nearly envision his smirk in the way he replied to the text. "Are you really certain that's a wise choice? Just let me know your location. 30 minutes later. Simon slipped into the passenger seat of my white BMW. Was instantly enveloped by the scent of his cologne. What a pleasant journey, he reflected, gliding his fingers across the leather upholstery. So Oliver is treating you nicely, is he? I disregarded the comment, cranking the music up to full volume. A velvety, seductive rhythm enveloped the car as I drove far from the edge. For the next hour, the tension lingered, ever-present and unvoiced, vibrating subtly beneath the surface of each glance, each casual touch of his arm against hers. mine as he fine-tuned the volume. We were not discussing it. There was no necessity for that. At a red light, I stole a glance at him, his profile striking against the vibrant neon glow of a nearby billboard. He was excessively youthful, overly impulsive, and undeniably perilous, and yet, there was an undeniable allure about him. I like this, he murmured suddenly. I blinked. What do you mean? He turned his head, his gaze fixing firmly on mine, the expression you wear when you're making an effort to hide your feelings for me. The signal shifted to green. I averted my gaze, pressing down on the gas pedal with more force than required. It was essential to put an end to this. I required authority. That's when I devised a strategy. Simon was a game I couldn't afford to play. Engage. I needed to put a stop to this, whatever it was, before it escalated beyond control. The next occasion I encountered Oliver, I engaged in play. My role impeccably. I leaned into him more, smiled more, talked about the future in a way that I understood would fill him with pride. I expressed my love for him, sharing my desire for a life together and my wish to marry him. And just as anticipated, Oliver acted without delay. His hands cradled my face, his eyes gleaming with a sincerity, a warmth that felt undeniable. Are you certain? He inquired, softly whispering how joyful I had just made him. And just like that, it was decided. Simon wouldn't even think about laying a finger on me now. He would never regard me in the same light again, however. Nothing at all. And yet I knew I had triumphed, for Oliver had uttered the very words I had longed to hear. Relocate today. I will organize the delivery of your belongings. I smiled, my voice dripping with sweetness. Are you certain? That's incredibly quick. I don't want to waste another second, Oliver said, kissing my temple. I long to awaken beside you. I desire your presence. And just like that, I was in. That evening, I found myself in the grand foyer of Oliver's home, absorbing the sight of my meticulously arranged suitcases. The residence exuded an impressive charm, blending contemporary design with a cozy atmosphere, adorned with rich dark woods and polished marble, a space that emanated strength and affluence. At the pinnacle of the staircase, Simon stood, his eyes a mystery as they fixed on me. His expression remained impassive, yet an undercurrent of something more lingered just below the surface. There was a keen awareness, a clarity that revealed he grasped precisely what I was up to. I maintained his gaze, my lips curling into a gentle, understanding smile. His eyes grew shadowy. Oliver pressed his lips against my cheek. Welcome back. Simon let out a soft laugh, shaking his head gently before slipping away down the hallway. Indeed, I was at home. Simon and I were on the brink of spending much more time together. My strategy had succeeded. Oliver felt a sense of joy. I was the ideal partner, affectionate, committed, prepared to embrace our shared future. And yet, beneath all of it, something far more perilous was taking shape. A serene, electrifying experience. Simon and I never discussed it. It was unnecessary. It was in the way we exchanged glances when no one else was around. The subtle brush of our fingers as we moved past one another, the undeniable sensation of his gaze on me, even as I feigned indifference. It began the day I feigned illness. I awoke in a state of unrest, my thoughts a chaotic blend of guilt, excitement, and an unsettling shadow, something I hesitated to identify. I informed Oliver that I wasn't feeling well. I let out a dramatic sigh, lightly brushing my forehead, ensuring I appeared just worn out enough to be convincing. He pressed his lips to my temple, a mix of worry and helplessness in his gaze. Take a moment to recharge. I'll follow up with you later, and then he vanished. The instant the front door clicked shut, I froze, ears straining, anticipation hanging in the air. I didn't have to wait long. Gentle footsteps echo in the corridor, a presence hovering just beyond my door. Then Simon emerged. He stood by the doorframe, arms folded, observing me intently. So. You're not feeling well, are you? His voice carried a playful lilt, yet there was an undertone that sent a gradual shiver racing down my spine. I allowed my lips to curve ever so slightly. Awful fever. Simon grinned slyly. Should I look after you, Mom? The manner in which he expressed it caused a knot to form in my stomach. He moved closer, the bed sinking a bit as he settled onto the edge. His fingers brushed against the sheets, his gaze deep and enigmatic. I ought to have put an end to this, should have set up point one, ought to have established a boundary. I did not. Simon reached out, gently tucking a strand of hair behind my ear. You're an exceptional performer, he whispered. Poor Oliver. He really doesn't have a clue, does he? I breathed out gently, and he never will. His fingers glided down, following the gentle contour of my collarbone. I felt lightheaded, dizzy from something far more intoxicating than wine. Simon inclined his head. What is it that you desire? Ellie. It was the first time he had ever uttered my name in such a way, not joking, not ridiculing. Simply unfiltered, completely exposed. I chose not to respond. I had no need to. Instead, I reached for him, pulling him closer, my lips grazing his in a soft whisper of a kiss. That was the moment the adventure truly began. From that day onward, everything transformed. We were not careless. We exercised caution, considerate with intention. A furtive glance when Oliver wasn't paying attention, fingers brushed against mine as we walked through the hallway. The gentle touch of his knee brushing against mine at the dinner table, concealed beneath the sleek surface of the polished wood. In those quiet moments, just the two of us. We exchanged playful glances, shared soft laughter, and found ourselves breathless, leaning against the walls. A tense, hushed game that neither of us wished to conclude. As night fell, I nestled beside Oliver, absorbing his soft murmurs about meetings, plans, and the future we envisioned together. I smiled, nodded, kissed his jaw, all while replaying the moments I had spent with his son just hours before. Simon flourished because of it. Each time Oliver pressed his lips against mine, Simon observed. They are not our friends, not a soul. I found myself entangled with a youthful companion at home, one who was never meant to be mine. It was exhilarating, perilous, unavoidable. If we played it correctly, the game could go on forever.